Welcome to Inspiring Histories, where ancient secrets and biblical mysteries come to life. What if I told you there are some ancient texts claim God was betrayed once before Lucifer ever existed? We've been told that Lucifer was the origin of evil. But what if he was simply continuing a pattern? What if the first betrayal didn't come from pride, but from rejection? What if Lucifer wasn't the first to betray God because there's evidence in texts the Bible left out? The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Apocalypse of Abraham. They describe a group of primordial beings, not angels, not demons, who stood near God at the dawn of time, and when he revealed his plan to create mankind. They didn't rebel, they withdrew. No shouting, no war, just silence, and their silence was louder than any scream. These beings were older than angels, created before the foundations of the earth. Endowed with full consciousness, they didn't fall like Lucifer. They turned their backs. Out of contempt, they refused to participate in the creation of man. They saw him as dirt, unworthy, a flawed design, and so they left, not thrown down. They walked away. Some ancient sources call this event the separation of the first-born. Others say it was the moment heaven lost its unity. Lucifer's rebellion came later, but he didn't invent betrayal, he inherited it. Today, we trace the origins of these ancient beings were, and why their choice may be the true beginning of the war between heaven and earth. They were not angels, not yet, and they were nothing like man. According to ancient traditions preserved in fragments of Enoch, in the shadows of the Zohar, and in commentaries buried deep within the Cairo Geniza, there existed a first creation formed of light, but not bound to obedience. The primordials, they weren't designed to serve. They weren't even created with form. They were awareness, will flame without fire, presence without body. Some texts describe them as radiant emanations, sparks of divine intelligence given full autonomy. Unlike angels, they were not messengers. They had no assignments, they simply were. And when God revealed his intention to create man, not from light but from dust, they were stunned. This wasn't just a new creation. It was a contradiction. How could something so low be called image of the Most High? That was the breaking point. Some of the primordials immediately withdrew. Others debated. One ancient midrash even describes a council of thought where the higher beings were consulted before Adam's formation, and some, according to that text, said, "Let not this creature be made, he will rebel, he will fall." But God made man anyway. And in that moment, a rift opened. Not of rebellion, but of refusal, a cold, quiet refusal. They didn't try to overthrow the throne. They didn't accuse. They simply stepped out of alignment. Some Jewish mystics call this moment Shvirata Matshava, the breaking of the intention. Others refer to these beings as the blind watchers or the forgotten line, who turned from the light not out of ignorance, but in protest. Kabbalistic texts even suggest they were sealed away in regions where time doesn't move, where glory cannot reach. They are not punished. They are paused in the Dead Sea. Scrolls, fragments speak of spirits who dwell in stillness, who once stood near the presence, but now observe from far. They are not demons. They are not lost. They are simply disconnected, like stars that chose to stop burning. Their silence was not neutral. It had weight. It set a precedent. Lucifer may have declared war, but the primordial made disobedience possible. And that's what makes their story even more dangerous, because if betrayal could begin with a whisper, if turning away was enough to fracture heaven, what does that mean for us? God wasn't overthrown, he was abandoned. The first pain in heaven wasn't rebellion, it was rejection. No war, no blood, just a quiet severing, a pulling away by those who once stood closest to the light. And that silence, it wasn't neutral, it cut deeper than any weapon. Jewish mystics described this moment with a phrase rarely heard, or amnital mayhem, the low hayim. Their light was taken, but not their lives. They still existed, but dimmed, set aside, unplugged from purpose. This wasn't judgment, it was heartbreak. For the first time in eternity, the Creator stood in the presence of a creation that no longer desired him. That was the first rupture. According to a commentary, the angels asked God, "Why would you make man who will only sin?" And God replied, "Even so I will make him." But what the text doesn't say out loud, what's only whispered between the lines, is this: God didn't create man in spite of the earlier betrayal. He created man because of it. He wanted something new, not perfect, not luminous, but willing beings who could choose him even when they couldn't see him. The early traders left because they refused to serve dust. They rejected the idea that the Most High would give his image to something so low. But God leaned into that rejection. He didn't cancel the plan. He expanded it. He made man not as a replacement, but as a risk. The risk of love without sight, faith without certainty, devotion without glory. And that risk in itself was an answer to the pain, because when a creation chooses to leave, the only way to heal is to create someone who might choose to stay. And that's why Eden wasn't just the beginning of humanity. It was heaven's response to its first heartbreak. But that heartbreak wasn't forgotten, because when light dims in heaven, something ancient watches still there, still silent, still judging. And one of them wouldn't just walk away, he would rise. Lucifer saw what they had done. The primordials walked away in silence, but he refused silence. He turned their stillness into strategy, because where they withdrew in contempt, Lucifer stepped forward, not to submit, but to challenge. He wasn't the first to doubt God's plan, but he was the first to weaponize it. The book of Enoch calls him Helel ben Shikar, son of the morning, not because of his pride, but because of what he remembered. He had seen the first fracture. He knew the wound, and he saw in man not a reflection of God, but a flaw in the divine order. Lucifer didn't fall because of one moment of arrogance. He fell because he disagreed with the very blueprint of creation. According to a rare passage in the Apocalypse of Abraham, there was a shining one who argued that the throne should be given to those made of flame, not clay, and so he rose. Not as a thief in the night, but as a prosecutor. The Zohar hints that Lucifer saw himself not as a rebel, but as a guardian of divine hierarchy. He believed he was preserving holiness, that man was unworthy, that heaven should be protected from contamination. But by trying to correct what he saw as a divine mistake, he created the greatest distortion of all. He turned pain into accusation. He turned rejection into revolt. And for the first time, heaven shook. Not because someone walked away, but because someone tried to take control. But even his rebellion wasn't original. It was a reaction to a silence he could never accept. And as he fell, he didn't fall alone, because behind him were whispers, not soldiers, not rebels, but watchers, beings who had never fought, but had once refused to serve, and they saw it happening again. God was creating something new. Not another being of light, but a creature of blood, of breath, of dust, not in the likeness of angels, but in his own. This time, there would be no consultation, no counsel, no vote. Genesis simply says, "Let us make man in our image," but the ancient texts say more. In Midrash Tehillim, it is written that when God created Adam, the angels protested. They questioned the plan. "What is man, that you are mindful of him?" But God did not back down. According to the Zohar, God formed Adam from both dust and divine breath to confuse the accusers, to create something that could fall but also rise, because unlike angels, man would not be bound by proximity to glory. He would not serve out of fear or reflex. He would choose blind, free risking failure, but capable of love, and that made him more dangerous than Lucifer, and more powerful than those who came before him. Some Kabbalistic writings suggest that Adam's creation wasn't just an act of love, but of war, a strike against the spiritual elitism of the primordials, a declaration that dust could carry what light rejected. Man was heaven's answer to abandonment, not a servant, but a partner, not made to praise blindly, but to seek and decide. That's why Eden wasn't just a garden, it was a battlefield of ideologies, a place where heaven's most ancient tensions came to life. Adam unknowingly stood at the center of a conflict that began long before he breathed. A living reminder that God had not given up, that he had dared to begin again, and that choice was an insult to those who walked away, to those who had stood in glory and now saw it handed to clay. Genesis 3 opens with the serpent, already speaking to Eve. There's no build-up, no introduction. He goes straight to the point. Did God really say? It wasn't just a question. It was a tactic. Eve had heard the command secondhand. God had spoken directly to Adam in Genesis 2:17. Eve wasn't even created yet. Lucifer knew that. So he didn't challenge the rule. He challenged the relationship between Eve and God, between Eve and Adam, between humanity and truth. And here's what most people miss. The serpent didn't lie at first. He distorted. He twisted just enough to shift the foundation. Early Jewish Midrashim suggests that Eve even added words to God's original command. We must not touch it. God never said that. The seed of confusion had already taken root. But why Eve? Some ancient writings, including parts of the Zohar and mystical commentaries, suggest something deeper that the woman represented. Something Adam didn't. Intuition, receptivity, a mirror of the spiritual. Lucifer saw her not as weak, but as key, because if he could shift the foundation of humanity through her, he could unravel the whole design. And it worked. Not through force, not through threats, through conversation. Eve wasn't seduced, she was convinced, and that's what made the fall so effective. She reached for wisdom, she touched what was forbidden, and when she handed the fruit to Adam, he didn't resist. That's when everything broke. Lucifer's strategy wasn't to destroy from the outside, it was to infiltrate from within. And it all began. Eve stepped into a conflict that didn't begin with her, but everything changed because of her choice. The silence that once fractured heaven now echoed on earth, but the Creator had already prepared a path, not to punish, but to repair. Some ancient texts suggest this world was never meant to be flawless. It was meant to restore what turned away, to offer a second chance, not just to man, but to the design itself. Not through domination, but through decision. Existence became the invitation to return, to realign, and as long as time moves forward, that invitation still stands. So now the question remains. If the first betrayal came before Genesis, then who were they? These immortals who walked away from light. Comment below, who do you think they were? Silent rebels, watchers of forgotten lineage. Let us know your thoughts.